The Louisiana sun was relentless that afternoon, burning down like a furnace with no mercy. The kind of heat that makes the air shimmer and stick to your skin, making every breath feel thick and heavy. Nyla Carter stepped out of her father's old Dodge pickup, the worn leather seat still warm beneath her, clutching a brown paper bag of lunch in a battered thermos tightly against her side. The gravel beneath her worn sneakers crunched loudly as she made her way across the parking lot, each step kicking up little clouds of dust that hung lazily in the air. Crawford Diesel and Auto looked like it had been frozen in time, or maybe forgotten by it. The faded metal sign hanging crookedly above the door read, Crawford Diesel and Auto, though the D in diesel was barely hanging on by a rusted nail, barely visible through decades of grime and neglect. The building itself was a battered old warehouse, paint peeling off the walls like dry skin, and windows so grimy they reflected nothing but shadows. Nyla paused for a moment, taking it all in. This wasn't a place people came for shiny service or quick fixes. This was a sanctuary for the stubborn and the broken, where the oil-stained and grease-smeared kept the city moving one engine at a time. It was home. Inside, the air was thick with the unmistakable stench of burnt oil, sweat, and hot metal. A battered ceiling fan spun lazily, struggling to push around the heavy, stale heat that clung to everything. The low hum of a country song played softly from a dusty radio sitting atop a cluttered workbench, mingling with the occasional clang of tools and the deep voices of men who knew their work but didn't waste words. Before Nyla could take more than a few steps, a rough voice cut through the haze. "Hey, your old man around." Rick Harlan stood near the back of the garage, arms crossed over a frame built like a linebacker's, face smeared with grease and the weariness of 100 long days. His faded camo hat was pulled low, shadowing eyes that missed nothing but smiled at nothing. He was the kind of man who ruled his shop like a fortress, pride hanging thick around him like a second skin. Nyla didn't flinch. "Lunch for him," she said, lifting the brown bag slightly. Rick nodded, but his gaze drifted to the far corner of the shop, where a dusty 1969 Dodge Charger sat abandoned. The hood was propped open, revealing a tangle of rusted pipes, twisted wires, and brittle hoses that looked like they hadn't been touched in weeks. The red paint was faded and chipped, streaked with rust that told stories of neglect. "That Charger's been dead longer than my first marriage," Rick said loud enough for the others to hear. Two mechanics nearby, Dean and Travis, looked up from their coffee mugs, grinning at the challenge hanging heavy in the air. "You're Isaac Carter's girl, right?" Rick said, eyes locking onto Nyla. "Why don't you take a crack at it? Show us what your daddy taught you." Neela's heart hit her ribs. She knew exactly what this was, a dare, a test, a setup. They expected her to fail, to prove they were right about the mechanic's daughter being nothing but a girl in a grease-stained hoodie. But Nyla had been quiet too long. She shrugged off her backpack, the smirk tugging at her lips. "Just don't cry when I fix it," Dean chuckled. Travis snorted. Rick's lips twitched, but he didn't smile. Nyla knelt down by the tool chest that had been her father's for as long as she could remember. Its once bright red paint was chipped and dulled, a testament to years of hard use. She pulled out gloves way too big for her hands and slipped them on, feeling the familiar weight and texture that somehow grounded her. She tied her curls back in a messy bun, clicked on a flashlight, and stepped toward the Charger like she was facing a challenge that had waited her whole life. Under the hood was chaos, hoses curled wrong, wires hanging loose like broken veins, bolts so rusted they looked fused to the metal around them. One spark plug was missing, the battery cables were frayed, and every inch of the engine bay told stories of patch jobs and half-fixes. Nyla didn't touch a thing. She just watched. She breathed it in. She listened. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "The engine speaks if you know how to listen. Don't rush. Don't assume." Behind her, voices whispered. "That girl's wasting her time. She's just staring at it." Nyla ignored them. She crouched and tested the battery first. It was dead, but that was nothing new. The starter? Dead too. Alternator? Same story. The engine was a puzzle, but none of these pieces explained why it wouldn't start. Nyla shifted her focus to the dashboard, crawling beneath the steering wheel. The air smelled faintly of burnt plastic and ozone. Her fingers traced a wire looped in a strange place, taped up clumsily. She pulled back and wiped sweat from her brow. "Someone crossed the ignition wire with the voltage feed," she said, voice steady. "On purpose." Rick's eyes narrowed. "You accusing one of us?" "Not accusing. Just saying whoever did this wanted it to look like the car was broken, but really it was sabotage, designed to waste time and money until the owner gave up." The mood shifted. Dean stopped sipping his coffee. Travis frowned. Rick stepped closer, lips pressed in a thin line. "Had a guy from Baton Rouge work on this before. Said it was electrical. Charged me $900. Nyla let out a low whistle. "He did work the electrical, just the wrong way." Back under the hood, Nyla worked calmly, methodically. No rushing, no second-guessing. Every move precise. Every connection checked twice. Dean asked, "You always this calm?" Nyla smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Only when they doubt me." Rick watched, arms crossed, but something had shifted. He wasn't just watching a girl anymore. He was watching a mechanic. Nyla opened the distributor cap. "This isn't right," she said, pulling it free. "Wrong part. That's for a 74 Nova, not a 69 Charger. It messes with the timing." Rick knelt beside her, blinking slowly. "How do you know that just by looking?" She pulled out her phone, scrolled through a parts database, and showed him the number. "See? Not even close." Rick shook his head. "I thought your dad was just bragging when he said you had a gift." Nyla looked up with quiet confidence. "He wasn't." Travis finally stood, stretching and shaking his head. "I'm saying it now. If you get this thing running, lunch is on me." Nyla grinned, ducked back under the hood, and started rewiring. And just like that, she had shifted the story. They weren't looking at just the mechanic's daughter anymore. They were watching a force. The garage had fallen into an unusual silence. The usual sounds of metal banging against metal, the hum of air tools, and the boisterous banter of the mechanics all but vanished. Instead, all eyes were fixed on Nyla, who had slipped beneath the dashboard, the beam of her flashlight cutting through the shadows to reveal a knotted mess of wires that looked more like a trap than a repair. Her hands moved with steady precision as she traced each cable, her fingers mapping paths only she could decipher. Every so often she paused, her brows furrowing deeper, a flicker of something dark crossing her eyes. "This whole thing's rigged," Nyla muttered, mostly to herself. Dean leaned against the workbench, his usual cocky smirk replaced by a curious frown. Travis hovered nearby, his earlier mockery replaced by genuine concern. Rick stood off to the side, arms folded, his hard gaze locked on her every move like a man watching a ticking bomb. Minutes stretched as Nyla crawled further beneath the dash, twisting and untwisting wires, pulling back layers of insulation with a practiced touch. Then she paused, flashlight held steady as she spotted it. "False ground to the fuse box," she announced, voice cutting through the tension. "If I'd powered this up without checking, it would have fried the ECU, maybe even started a fire." Rick's jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might crack. Dean whistled low in disbelief. "You're serious?" Travis finally spoke, voice rough. Nyla nodded without looking up. "Dead serious. This wasn't just a sloppy repair. It was sabotage, clean and calculated." Rick took a slow step forward, his eyes narrowing. "Who'd do something like that?" Nyla slid out from beneath the dash, wiping her greasy hands on her worn jeans. "Someone who wanted to keep this car dead, but without leaving fingerprints. Someone who thought they could trick the next mechanic into wasting time, spending money, and walking away." Dean shook his head, speechless. "Victor," Rick said quietly, "the guy from Baton Rouge who worked on this before, charged me $900 and said it was electrical." Nyla exhaled sharply. "He wasn't fixing anything. He was hiding something." She picked up the Charger's hood latch and popped it open wider. "Look here." Her finger traced a thin wire looping oddly back to the fuse box. "See this bypass? This isn't factory. Someone wired this in to fool inspections, make it look like a natural fault, but it's a trap." The men around her exchanged uneasy glances. "Why mess with an old Charger like this?" Travis finally asked. Nyla's eyes darkened. Because it's worth more than it looks. If you get it running and keep it rough, you can flip it out of state for clean cash. But the wrong hands can change the VIN, swap parts, and it's gone. Forever. Rick's face paled at the thought. The buyer who backed out last month, Nyla continued, he was asking too many questions. Wanted to meet at night. Then he disappeared. The weight of that silence pressed down hard on everyone. Dean cleared his throat, nodding slowly. So what do we do now? Rick rubbed the back of his neck, tension thick on his face. We lock it up. We don't move it. Not until I hear from Eddie's contact. Eddie. That was Nyla's dad. An old-school mechanic who had taught her everything she knew. The man who never raised his voice, but expected her to earn her seat in the garage. Nyla sat on the edge of the workbench, the grease-smudged rag in her hand forgotten as she stared at the charger, now humming quietly as if waking from a long sleep. Then from across the street, a white pickup pulled slowly into view. Dark-tinted windows blocked any glimpse inside. The engine was off. The driver didn't move, didn't check a phone, just sat and watched. Nyla's heart skipped. She pulled out her phone and texted her dad. That car's not right. Man watching the shop. Rick looked up at her. White Chevy. She nodded. Same guy. Victor together they watched as the truck stayed put. No signals, no movements. Just waiting. Rick didn't hesitate. We're moving the Charger. Back behind the tire stacks. Locked and covered. They hustled, Rick backing the car into the dim shed out of sight. The doors locked with a definitive clang. But as they returned to the garage, the white pickup crept forward. Engine rumbling softly now. A man stepped out. Tall, mid-40s, jeans, boots, and a pale shirt stained from days on the road. His eyes scanned the garage like a predator sizing up prey. He stopped 10 feet from Nyla. You work here? He asked, voice low and calm. Today I do, Nyla replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. He smirked, cold and unkind. That Charger got fixed. Must have been a miracle. Nyla tilted her head. You usually follow miracles in a white truck? The man chuckled darkly. I was interested in buying that car. Thought it was gone. Well, Nyla said, voice sharp, it's not for sale. The man's eyes narrowed. You speak for the owner now? When Nyla opened her mouth, Rick stepped up beside her. She's not lying. You got business, take it up with me. The man turned slowly. Rick Harlan. Been a while. Not long enough, Rick replied. There was a tense pause, then the man's tone grew serious. That car's tied to something bigger than you know. Serious money. It was never meant to be driven again. Rick's face hardened. Then you shouldn't have left it broken. The man didn't laugh. This isn't a game. I can walk away now. But if that car disappears again, no one asks questions. You keep your shop. Everyone stays quiet. Rick stepped forward. Let me be clear. If I find out you sabotage that Charger, or worse, I'll call every agency from here to Baton Rouge. Next time, you won't be parked. You'll be cuffed. The man looked Nyla up and down. You shouldn't get involved in things that don't concern you, sweetheart. Nyla's smirk was the only answer. Then don't bring your problems to my shop. He got back in the truck and drove off without another word. That night, Nyla sat on the back steps of her house, phone in hand, replaying the encounter. Her father, Isaac, came out with 2 mugs of iced tea. He sat beside her, handing her one without a word. Are you all right? He finally asked. Nyla nodded, eyes fixed on the dark street. I didn't come here to prove anything, she said softly. I was just dropping off lunch. Isaac sighed. Life's funny that way. You show up for one thing and end up fighting battles you didn't ask for. She looked at him. That man, he watched us the whole time. Didn't flinch, like he already knew the next move. Isaac nodded slowly. That car isn't just metal. It's tied to something deeper. You woke it up. Nyla leaned back, exhaustion and determination mingling in her eyes. I didn't want any of this. I know, Isaac said softly, but you handled it. And now, you're part of it. The sun set behind them, casting long shadows over a world that was about to change. For the Charger, the garage, and most of all, Nyla. The morning sun had barely broken through the humid Louisiana haze when Nyla's phone buzzed sharply on the nightstand. Her eyes flicked open to the piercing sound, heart already pounding from a restless sleep. It was Rick. His voice was heavy, laced with disbelief and unease. "I locked that shed myself last night," he said. "But this morning, the charger's gone. No broken locks, no tire tracks, no forced entry. It just disappeared." Nyla's breath hitched, the weight of the situation crashing down on her like a freight train. This wasn't a simple theft. This was a calculated message, a response to her defiance, a challenge thrown down in the shadows. "They waited for it to start again, didn't they?" she whispered, voice tight. Rick sighed. "Yeah, they were patient. Then they took it while we were blind." She sat upright, eyes sharp despite the early hour, a cold fire kindling inside her. This wasn't just about a car anymore. It was war. "We can't just stand here," she said, voice resolute. "We have to know who we're dealing with." Later that day, Nyla sat across from Eddie King, a man who didn't wear suits or badges anymore, but carried the weight of years investigating the darkest corners of crime. Eddie was a former federal agent turned private investigator and consultant to people who found themselves tangled in webs bigger than themselves. He pulled up files on his cracked laptop, eyes scanning over the Charger's long and checkered past. "This car," Eddie began slowly, "has been through hell and back. Title disputes, insurance fraud, stolen and resold more times than you can count. It's a hot commodity for the underground." Nyla leaned forward, absorbing every word. "They don't just want a car," Eddie said, locking eyes with her. "They want control. Control of the flow of money, power, and secrets. That Charger isn't just metal and wire. It's a key to a bigger game." She nodded, the pieces clicking into place. By fixing that engine, she had awakened more than a machine. She'd stirred a hornet's nest. Eddie's voice dropped, solemn. "Those who tried to bury the truth, they're desperate now, and desperate people get dangerous." Nyla felt the gravity of those words sink in. Her world of grease and gears was suddenly entwined with shadows far darker than any engine fire. That night, sitting alone under the dim light of her desk lamp, Nyla stared at the laptop screen. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, then began to type, pouring out the raw truth and fiery resolve she'd carried inside for so long. If you've ever been underestimated, pushed aside, told you don't belong, know this. Your hands, your mind, your relentless work speak louder than any doubt. When they dare you to try, don't just meet their challenge, redefine it. She paused and read her words again, feeling their power. Because sometimes the truth roars louder than any engine. Expert perspective. In automotive repair and restoration, the difference between fixing a car and uncovering sabotage is monumental. Nyla's story reveals an extraordinary level of skill, not only in mechanical expertise, but in forensic investigation. Vehicles involved in criminal enterprises often bear intentionally hidden faults designed to mislead and waste time, which can cost lives and money. Spotting subtle clues like altered wiring or non-factory parts demands a rare combination of technical knowledge, intuition, and courage. Nyla's calm, methodical approach highlights how mastery in any craft requires deep listening, not just to machines but to the stories they carry. Her story stands as a powerful testament to resilience and brilliance in the face of systematic deception. The shocking final message. Just as Nyla closed her laptop, her phone buzzed again. A new text from an unknown number. "We're just getting started.